So first, let's imagine a dictator in charge of the government. And so the dictator in this model only cares about how much tax revenue he can steal for himself. And so on our graph here, we have total tax revenue per year on the vertical axis and how long the dictator can be expected to stay in power. And so the idea here is that the dictator will provide some public service at a cost of C, but will tax at some rate above that. And the difference between the tax rate and the cost of the public service is the political rent that goes to the dictator. And the idea behind point X is that if the dictator taxes at a really high level, right, at T2, then per each year he's going to get more rent, but it's more likely that citizens will remove him from office in an uprising, in a revolution. Whereas if he decides to tax at point Y, then each year he gets a lower political rent, but citizens will be less likely to throw him out. And so maximizing that political rent sort of depends on a number of factors. It could be that we have this downward sloping duration curve so that there's some maximum period that a dictator can remain in power. That might just be however long the dictator lives. Um, but the more he decides to tax the country, the more likely it is that his citizens throw him out of power. So we get this downward sloping curve that is somewhat similar to a monopolist demand curve. And then we can think about, all right, well, what is the point at which the dictator will tax? Well, here we have ISO rent curves that show the combination that gives the dictator the same political rent. So it's just the tax minus the cost of the public service. So in this case, it would be T star minus C times the expected duration. And so the highest ISO rent curve that we can get on for this person is at point B, right, where the slope of the two are equal. Now, it could be that we have different preferences by different dictators, right? Some dictators might just want to have as much uh, political rent per year as possible and aren't worried too much about staying in power too long. Or it could be that people want to stay in power as long as possible with with a lower amount of political rent. Another possibility is that we don't have a single dictator, but instead we have a governing elite. And so the governing elite, the idea is that these are top government officials that are in a political party and have some sort of common interest. But they are subject to political competition. And so political competition means that they have to face some election, and there's a possibility that they will lose the election and get thrown out of power. And so that is going to, the more competitive that is, that will lead to a flatter duration curve, meaning that they can't tax as much, right? And that means they can get less political rents. Whereas if there is less competition, might be a single party country, a single party system, then they will have a steeper duration curve. They'll be able to tax more. So what's going to happen with tax levels and the duration of the uh, government really depends on the shapes of the curves, right? So we could have both a sort of, similar to an income and substitution effect, where the income effect shows that government receives lower rents at every level of taxation, right? So they can't get as much rent because they can't tax as much. And then there's the substitution effect where raising taxes bears a higher risk of being dismissed. So you can see in this case, taxes are lower, but the duration of the government is the same. It's just balanced out. Historically, uh, there's been a big benefit to political stability, both for dictators and for systems that have a governing elite, which means that you get a flatter duration curve, but that duration can last longer, right? And so in this case, we are actually able to get to a higher ISO rent curve by accepting a flatter duration curve that has the potential to last longer. And so in this case, you might be willing to reduce taxes, but your duration that you'll be in government it increases from, in this case, D star to D double star. and we move from A to A prime, which increases the rents of the governing elite. And so there is a big benefit to political stability, both for the governing elite and, of course, for the economy in general.